Hello everyone. Since this is either a highlight, a standalone book, or the first episode in a series, I'm jumping in to remind you what the rules are for this podcast. First rule is, no real people stories. That means that any details from our own lives are merely anecdotal, we do not read books about real people, and we are not reading historical fiction. The second rule is that we are basing our analyses off of how the author treats characters and what they put them through. We are not judging the accuracy of the trauma, the accuracy of any actual conditions that may be portrayed, nor the authenticity of a character's reaction to that trauma or that particular condition. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The hosts are not trained professionals, and their opinions come solely from personal experience. In this episode, we discuss fictional depictions of trauma and violence that may not be suitable for all audiences. Please take care of yourselves. Specific content warnings for each episode can be found in the show notes. Events in the media are discussed in approximate order of escalation. This episode contains spoilers.
This week, in Beneath the Citadel, the children of the rebellion struggle against all of the forces of prophecy to carry on their parents' legacy. Hi, I'm Nicole.
And I'm Robin, and we have a guest for today's episode.
Hi, I'm Christian from the Lazy Gringo Podcast.
All right.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Absolutely. Thank you for having me read. It's been a long time since I've read a book, to be completely honest with you.
Well, we're glad you joined us for this one. So for our factions, we have Casa, Evander, Alice, Newt, Vesper, Ansel, the Council, and Solon, and Mira. For our first topic, it is child abuse with a little bit of a focus on Newt here, but they all of the kids have something going on. Who wants to start?
I'll let y'all start, but yeah, you hit it. All the kids got. Can I cuss on this podcast? Prefer not to. Prefer not to? Okay. All of the kids have their own things going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll let y'all start, but...
Let's maybe start with, Newt's the most direct, obvious, this is definitely child abuse one, but there's a lot of systemic stuff going on with Evander and Alice. But Newt, he was, trained by his dad to be vigilant and paranoid and fast, and there's a bit where he notices that he wasn't constantly paranoidly paying attention to his surroundings, and it's at the very, very end of the book, and I think that comment is meant to show growth and kind of getting away from his past a bit. Because it's a moment where he realizes that he has been able to relax, but that's at the very end. He spends a lot of the book with little things sprinkled in where we slowly get this picture of all the stuff his dad was putting him through.
So I wanted to real quick highlight a piece of that with Newt. So part of what Newt's dad does is trains him to pop certain joints in and out of place. And that over time in the book, we know kind of degrades his joint stability to the point where by the time our story starts, he has to actually take bandages and basically strap his joints together. We kind of wanted to highlight this a little bit because I, for different reasons, have a similar issue where my joints, particular ones especially, but in general, don't necessarily stay where they're supposed to be. And when I was in middle school and high school, I took ace bandages and would just kind of wrap up the joint that was doing the worst that day. I also I had this whole routine figured out of like ace bandage, tight clothing layer, loose clothing layer to kind of like hold myself together, essentially. I've had a couple of injuries that now, you know, after they were healed, we've kind of looked at and figured out like, oh, this is probably because these joints weren't super stable, and then I had an issue with that actually caused injury. Different things like that. And so it's very rare to ever really see like even just, you know, disability in a book is rare, but seeing something like that where it actively causes him problems every day depicted in a book without it being a superpower is ridiculously rare. And I think this is the only time I have ever read a book that talks about just general joint instability. Like, I don't think I've ever read another book that has somebody pictured in a book that I can go, oh, that's how I work. Great.
I'll let you know if I come across another one, but yeah.
I mean, and it's funny because it's for very different causes. Like, I did not intentionally pop my own joints out.
So here's the thing. I
super
definitely interpreted this as he has something structurally similar to what you have, and his dad just trained him to take advantage of it. I didn't understand the implication to be that he's only doing this because his dad taught him and anyone could have.
Oh, no, I don't know which way that leans, but I would also like to point out that you are related to me.
This is true.
And so somebody who doesn't necessarily think, oh yeah, human beings can just exist with this problem, it might not read that way.
I frankly assumed that the author knows that this is a thing that can happen and put it in the book. That's how I read it. Because of course someone like Newt's dad would take advantage of it. The way the author has chosen to write this character, like, absolutely exploiting one more thing. But yeah, I'm glad that Newt starts the book like knowing what to do to take care of his joints, but it also like he mentions in his narration that he knows there's gonna be a day where he's gonna break and he can't go back, and that scares him.
Yeah.
And so with like this as being part of the way he was abused by his dad, with his dad like making him do this thing, even if his body naturally was inclined in this direction, and I think it would have to be, otherwise this wouldn't work. Even if his body was already set up to do this, his dad training him and making him do it is accelerating the deterioration, and he knows it.
And especially Newt was the more fragile of the group. Not even just because of this. I don't necessarily want to call it like a deformity, but this.
I just call it the joint.
It's a disability.
Yeah, it is a disability.
Disability. That was the word I was looking for. Thank you. And it's not even just because of this disability. It's his personality in general. He is the most frail of the group. Yeah. And so the fact that his parent did kind of force this upon him and force him to keep using his disability for, nefarious purposes or whatever you'd like to call it, it does kind of, lead you to think that absolutely, that's a form of parental abuse. And it's, he just got the raw end of the deal there.
Yeah, and I think what you said about his emotional state is something, because he's definitely the one in the group who is upfront about not being okay. But like Alice is having chronic panic attacks and pretending she's not.
Yep.
Casa is about 0.2% of a width of a hair from falling apart forever. The whole book.
I love that fly by the seat of your pants.
Gosh.
Like, oh my God. Could you imagine living like that? Just literally making things up as you go along.
Well, I mean, and she even says, I make it up as I go along because if I think it through, I'm going to fall apart. Mm-hmm. Like, she says that at one point to Alice, is basically like, I need you to make plans for, like, good plans because I can't handle doing it. I don't have the emotional ability to do that because it's too much. It's overwhelming. It's so funny because Newt is the one who is like, hey, I'm not okay, guys. And everyone else is like, it's just you.
Yeah.
Not me at all, I promise. And none of those kids are doing all right.
Yeah, but at the same time, and sorry to interrupt, but Newt did hide his feelings a lot of the time, too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
No, they all hid stuff, but I think Newt was, like, it mentions how, like, he's physically smaller than the others.
Yeah.
He's at least physically smaller than Evander, and it means that, like, they also, like, some of what he has going on is more physically obvious. So, like, everyone is tired and stressed. Newt just dislocated stuff in his hand. Like, it's more obvious that something is going on, but also, he doesn't talk to them about his dad. Like, he tells us, the audience, about it, but he doesn't talk to them about his father. He doesn't. Like, he doesn't talk to them about how his father abused him. Even when they already hate his dad for what he did, I don't know, it feels like he doesn't think there's more room for him to talk about how he was hurt by his dad too, because so much of Casa's view of it is that Newt's father hurt everybody else, and if his father also hurt Newt, then that, at least early on, before the book starts, would have complicated Casa's ability to hate Newt for being his father's son.
Yeah, like, I can't hear about you actually being a victim also, because then I can't treat you badly?
Because you had this cushy life because of your father's betrayal. And Newt's like, yeah, he was busy, like, abusing me and making me be a super spy dislocation boy, and that hurt. And Casa's like, but the revolution.
This week, in Beneath the Citadel, the children of the rebellion struggle against all of the forces of prophecy to carry on their parents' legacy.
All right, on to memory loss. So this has, like, plot and structure mechanics that are all built around memory loss, and it is one of my favorite things in this book. It also messes with the characters and causes a lot of trauma for them. But it's like a slippery, insidious kind of trauma because, like, a lot of times what they're left with is sometimes knowing that something's gone but not quite knowing what it is, but a feeling like it mattered. And then other times they have no idea anything was taken.
That is an interesting mechanic because it feels, at first glance looking at that, it feels just like plot convenient. Like, well, if they should know for plot reasons, then they can tell. But like reading through it, I was actually watching that pretty carefully because that was my immediate thought was, is this just convenient? But it feels almost like memories that they know are missing are the ones that have strong connections and implications on other memories.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that they don't notice are kind of more isolated, or they were taken out whole cloth.
Right. So, like, when Newt has most of his happy memories taken in one of the most heartbreaking scenes.
Yeah.
It's like because a lot of what was taken was, like, happy memories with Evander, but not the memories of how much he liked Evander and wanted to be with Evander.
Right.
It left kind of like the scaffolding in place for him to be able to, like, put in new memories. But also, it seems like there's some threshold at which if you take this level of memory, it doesn't change who the person is. It just changes what they can like how easily they can get to certain emotions. Because if you have almost no happy memories, it's going to be harder to, like, feel happy. But there's, like, canonically some point at which you're just not there anymore. Because that's one of the ways that Solon is attacking people and, like, killing them, is just stripping them of everything. And, like, it mentions that, you know, people who have been attacked in this way could be maybe taught to feed themselves, but they can't get words back. Like,
well, and the opposite even, almost.
Well, when Vesper takes in other memories?
Solon, who takes in everybody and is stealing everyone else's memories, is almost losing himself as a person the other direction, where he has so many people inside him that he doesn't have any emotional grounding anymore.
It seems like he wants what he has been shown will happen. And that's it. That's all he has.
That's it. That's his whole everything. Yeah.
I was thinking a little bit about, like, just kind of wondering, like, oh, what's happening to all of these people who just can't take care of themselves anymore. And it's not like there are, you know, real world disabilities where, like, we know that the person has more in them than they can express, and they might need help with things. That's very different from what's going on here, where, like, canonically everything was pulled away, and it's probably closer to them being in a vegetative state than it is to a person with dementia. Like, if you're looking to, like, what's going to be a little bit of a closer analog, it's like, yeah, they could move, but the blacksmith, he is doing nothing. He's basically in a coma because he can't. There's nothing there to reach for anything else.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
and something that isn't even addressed in the book that just occurred to me is we see just a tiny fragment of how devastating it is to have a family member or a friend or someone you care about who is kind of reduced to almost a vegetative state.
Yeah.
But that's not, other than this brief glimpse of that it would push someone to try and restore this person and care for this person. We don't see this explored at all. It's almost this fridge horror of, like, of those people.
Oh no, there are hundreds of these. Like,
more.
You know,
even.
But it doesn't show us. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't even know how many, and how many people die because they live alone, or they and their family had their whole everything.
Well,
and all of their functionality just taken away from them, and then they just starve in their home. Like, we don't even know, but you can think of the repercussions of that just spiraling.
Well, I think,
yeah, and, like, Mira taking revenge, it's because, like, her father was targeted well, it's unclear whether he was targeted specifically, but once it happened, she was blackmailed specifically. And so that has a little bit different of a path than just all the people he's randomly siphoning memories from, because, like, they don't know who's doing it. They don't have any, like, direction to look to get it back. But Mira is offered this chance, and then it's not even a real chance. He's not trying to help her. He doesn't care. He was just using her desperation to get her father back in order to get what he wants. But one of the things that I liked in the way characters are shown is we don't know how much Vesper's uncle does or doesn't feel like a different person when Vesper has taken the memories he's offered her. But Vesper feels like he's a very different person. He feels like, but it's not a person unlike himself. It's more like before he had the experiences that are bound up in the memories that she's taken. So he doesn't become like not him. He becomes a different version of him that normally would be inaccessible because of time. And I like that. I like that it doesn't treat it like pull the right memory and someone isn't themselves. It's what's left is still them.
Yeah.
And even with Newt, you know, he's lost the memories of kissing Evander, but what's left is Newt who really wants to kiss Evander. Like, he doesn't, like, that's still there. And I really did like that. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of fridge horror implications with this book. Like, the world that they're in is really awful and really dark, and the story focuses on a couple very specific ways that it's awful and dark for the people living in it. And it shows us, you know, this one example with the blacksmith and the way the main characters sometimes lose and sometimes get back their memories.
Which I loved that whole concept of, oh, I'm going to take your memories real quick, but I promise I'll give them right back.
Like, I promise I'll handle them back unharmed, you know, I swear.
Or, like, while I'm searching for certain memories, I have complete access to your mind. That was really interesting, because the whole, you know, a whole plot thread was that the whole plan can become unhinged because they have to sell this guy some of their memories. Gaz, correct? You know, they had to sell Gaz some memories, and while he was in there, he had free and complete access to their head. And that, you know, he could have easily just taken without telling, which is another, you know, again, like, they didn't really, the author didn't really build on that, but she did imply that this is something that could happen. And then as someone was saying earlier, you could eventually lose yourself in the process, and who knows how many people are out there that have actually lost themselves to losing too many memories.
Even without Solon as a thing. Yeah, like at a lower level, that's going to be randomly happening to people. Oh my goodness, I just realized affairs are going to go very differently in this world.
Yeah.
Yes?
Affairs and cheating.
I don't remember it happening, I promise.
Oh no.
Yeah. No, I bet, because Gaz would totally do that. He would totally take the memory from someone if they, like...
That's a good side hustle.
Did, you know, wanted it to be, oh my goodness. That's
not even his side. He makes his living
selling memories to the authorities.
People by memory. Like, that's not even a side hustle for him. That's just his main advertisement on his door. Like, I will help you hurt someone else.
Yeah,
here.
Yeah, true. And then he also sells it to the Citadel for an even higher price point.
Yeah.
Good business.
Also that, like, rich people buying poor people's happy memories.
Oh,
so
my
then
gosh.
The poor people maybe don't get their happy memory back. It's unclear how Gaz works. Because he can give it back and then still pass it on to someone else because he never loses it.
Yeah, which is an interesting mechanic.
Yeah. Well, I like that mechanic.
Oh, I'm not saying it's bad, just...
Yeah.
Oh boy. This week in Beneath the Citadel, the children of the rebellion struggle against all of the forces of prophecy to carry on their parents' legacy.
All right, on to Death and the Specter of Mortality. All right, so the dead parent count.
Oh boy.
Have, Cass's parents, Newt's mom,
countless other people.
Countless other, like, everyone in the revolution.
Oh no. What's
everyone
her name?
in the revolution, yeah.
What's her name?
Oh, Mira. Well, I mean...
Yes.
Because
Mira's parents are dead.
Because the blacks, like, her mother is not around.
Or no, not Mira. I'm sorry. Yes, Mira, but also Vesper. Vesper's parents.
Vesper, yes.
Yep, Vesper's parents.
Oh, yeah, because he's her uncle.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. No, her parents are alive. She's just not with them.
Are they?
Yep, they're alive. They sent her away. They think she's just working for her uncle.
Oh, okay.
In a different part of the city.
I definitely thought she was an orphan.
Nah, because she's not, like, they're not active in her life right now, but she talks about briefly about how they think she's doing something other than what she's doing.
Gotcha.
I think I have that right. Anyway, so there's a lot of death. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of death of self via memory loss, which may or may not then be followed by, like, literal final death when they, like, don't get their memories back and then die because they were in a coma, and you can only do that so long. Very, very similar to being in a coma.
Yeah, basically being a vegetative state.
Yep. So,
which, you know, a lot of that can, you know, a lot of people would say that, you know, that could be a fate worse than death is, you know, to be alive but have no functionality. But one thing I did find is that, you know, Casa had to deal with death early. And then minus a couple of other characters, no one really had to deal with death until ultimately Casa's death, which I thought was really good storytelling on the author's part, because, you know, Casa learned the impact of death early and how it can impact others and impact self. And she learned that lesson early, and part of her destiny was to teach others that lesson.
And she tries to deal with it by saying that she's immortal. And when people are like, Casa, you're not immortal, she's like, I'm not wrong yet. And then since, you know, all this was chosen by the author, I did like that the character who was like, nope, I'm immortal, I'm not wrong yet. Especially when Casa, like, can't stand to be wrong, like, isn't okay being wrong ever, is then finally the most wrong and accepts it because when she takes the poison, she knows that it's poisoned. She knows, and she does it anyway. So she accepts that she's going to be wrong about being immortal and goes through it anyway. Is how, like, you know, there isn't enough space in that short scene to make that point extremely explicitly, but, like, to me, like, that's the implication of it. Also, it would have felt, like, very bad and explainy for it to be, like, trying to say all that right then. But all the pieces are there. Like, it's set up that she's not okay being wrong, and figuring out that, like, someone can have a different point of view and that doesn't make them horrible. Like, that emotional journey with Vesper is really, really hard for Casa.
Yeah.
And she gets there finally. And then part of finishing that journey is that
finally admitting you're wrong.
Yeah, but she wins by admitting she was wrong, basically.
I would like to point out,
and not making the same mistake twice.
Yes.
I would like to point out that we've mentioned in topic 1 Cass's almost suicidal, like, recklessness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this was a denial of her own mortality. I think she didn't want to talk about the fact that she didn't care And I don't think this was... My personal view of this is I don't think this was a switch. I think this was literally her going, okay, great, my time to go. Bye.
Maybe.
Because leaving any earlier than that would have been unacceptable because the things weren't done.
Yes. Well, and also leaving any earlier would have required her to do something to... Like, this is the first moment we see in the narrative where if she dies, she doesn't take her whole team with her. This is the first, she literally goes by herself to go drink poison to ensure the other person dies. She doesn't have her team. The rest of the thing, if she gets caught,
when she goes alone, she doesn't know that she's going to have to drink it. But in that moment,
well, no, but she knew planning it though is the thing. She didn't know in the moment of action, but she had the memory of this being a plan.
Well, no, she knew that she knew that she had
achieved. Or maybe she knew the entire time.
I'm saying she knew she had she knew that she had poisoned it, and then that memory was removed. But she didn't know that when she got down there, he would make her drink it. That's all I'm saying. She didn't know that she would have to drink it. But yeah,
see, I read it as she did know she would have to drink it because otherwise, like, that's the logical, how is he going to test it and make sure it's safe?
Yeah.
Like, I assumed that she knew, which was part of the memory that was taken.
No, because we see the whole memory, and it...
But
I don't think it matters a lot either way because she still went by herself so that the risk wouldn't be on anyone else.
But I'm just saying, like, it fits with her.
She didn't go down there going, "I'm going to take poison," but I think
but she also didn't go down there like, "I'm going to live through this."
This is true.
Like, no, she absolutely was like, "No, he's either going to kill me, or they're going to kill, or the Citadel is going to like." There's no... That was a suicide admission inherently. And I just don't think it was a character change at all. I think that this whole time she's been pretending she thinks she's immortal because then when she's reckless, she doesn't have to talk about it being fine. If that makes sense. Like, but also that was how I read it.
Part of her arc is realizing that she can be wrong, and yes,
absolutely. I'm not, but I think those are separate things.
Oh, okay,
that's my argument.
All right,
that's how I read it.
You know, one thing that we haven't mentioned at all is Evander's blood bond, which
true.
That whole process was basically, you know, he even admitted in the book that he had no idea when he went to go make that blood bond if he was even a suitable candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He just did it out of the sheer necessity to save his family or to help support his family. And so he, in a way, had already come to accept death, but then was retaught that lesson because he didn't actually die.
Yeah, that's true. He definitely went in like, who knows if I'm compatible, we'll see what happens. Wish me luck, ready, go.
Yeah.
And there's also a difference between being okay with the idea of your death and being okay with the idea of your loved ones dying. Because depending on the person, it's a very different thing to picture that the world will go on without you in it and picturing what your world would look like without someone in it who's important to you. And so Evander was willing to accept that the world might go on without him, but had never paused to think what it could look like without Casa.
So, I have a question. Have you ever wanted to get into comics, but you just didn't know where to start? Well, welcome to ComicsQuest. I'm JD Martin, and every week I sit down with a guest to talk a comic that I think anybody can pick up and start their comics reading journey. We take a look at psychedelic sci-fi, fantastical action, heart-wrenching love stories, and of course, superheroes. So check us out at certainpov.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
This month, we'd like to welcome our new supporter on Patreon, Dare. Thank you so much for supporting the show, and if you would like to join Dare in keeping the show going, you can check us out on patreon.com/booksthatburn. Thank you. This month, we'd like to welcome our new supporter on Patreon, Dare. Thank you so much for supporting the show, and if you would like to join Dare in keeping the show going, you can check us out on patreon.com/booksthatburn. This month, we'd like to welcome our new supporter on Patreon, Dare. Thank you so much for supporting the show, and if you would like to join Dare in keeping the show going, you can check us out on patreon.com/booksthatburn.
This week in Beneath the Citadel, the children of the rebellion struggle against all of the forces of prophecy to carry on their parents' legacy.
On to the wrap-up and ratings for our gratuity rating for the child abuse. What do we think?
I would argue that this is definitely severe. The reason I think it is severe, I think it is backstory and severe. But I'm arguing severe because kind of actually, as we kind of talked about off of the recording before we started, things like dislocation of joints can make people
cringe,
uncomfy. You can get a very visceral reaction, because you can even get like almost like phantom pain. I've had people will literally say like, no, this made my joints hurt and it's not happening to me. So I would argue that reading what happens to Newt is going to kick it up to severe levels for some people. Even if that's not necessarily the case for everybody. So this might be a your mileage may vary thing on this, but my argument would be backstory and severe when we deal with Newt's joint issues.
I would say Newt's backstory is severe, but the joint issues, at least for me personally, it's a sound more so than like reading it isn't as...
Is it not as bad?
Yeah, it's not as bad like reading, oh, the neck cracked, but when you physically hear it, that's when you get the like, ugh. But yeah, so...
But I would also leave space for there being a lot of people who can hear the sound in their mind when the description is on the page. So I think since it is describing this the most severe that you can describe this, I think. Like it has like fair amount of detail. I'd say either moderate or severe.
Yeah, and I think it all
joint stuff
ultimately determines on how the reader can picture and hear things in their own mind.
So I'm going to put down backstory /severe / your mileage may vary.
Yeah, mileage may vary.
Is not an official category, but you might be okay with this. But it does involve
we try not to say, well, it depends all the time. Because of course it does. But
this is one of those weird ones where, I mean, I said, like, I don't see this kind of thing depicted in books very much. So it's harder to look at this and say, like, no, this is an experience people know how they'll react to.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely. And, as I mentioned, in reading it, I clearly knew what was going on, but it wasn't as severe as, like, hearing someone in real life, the brrrr of, yeah.
Makes sense. Moving on to memory loss. How do we feel about this one?
Oh, this is severe.
Just straight up, no holds barred.
This is severe. Especially like a couple, like the thing that I said was one of the saddest moments in the book. That thing.
Yeah.
This is severe. It's got a lot of detail. It explores a bunch of different facets of it from different angles, and most of them are sad.
Yeah.
I 1000% agree.
In a probably equally easy to call. How do we feel about death and mortality?
The death is severe.
Yeah.
I think the care rating on this is going to be interesting, but the death is severe.
Yeah.
Just all of the death. There's a lot of them.
All of the death. Implied and on page. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just, yeah.
Yep. All right. Is this trauma integral, interchangeable, or irrelevant for the child abuse? The systemic stuff is integral to the plot. Yeah, a lot of the
Newt's stuff, I would argue, is also integral because he makes plot things happen.
Right.
With his skill set that would not exist without his specific physical trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I think there's tiny bits of it that could be interchangeable, but like so much of it is integral, I think.
I agree, but also with Newt, this could have been a 100% self-taught skill. That's
very true.
And could have still been integral to the plot. In order to
so it maybe didn't need to be traumatic.
It didn't necessarily need to be traumatic, but that helps create more empathy with the character.
He could have been like inspired by the revolution and like just hated his dad or something. Like it didn't have to be all that other stuff. It
wasn't necessarily integral, but it did make it better.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, so Newt's stuff is interchangeable. The rest of it is pretty integral. Like, you couldn't tweak it much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Memory loss. This is part of the whole fabric of this city's society. So
yeah, it's 1,000% integral. Cannot be changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And death.
Death is I think it's integral. I think some individual deaths maybe were interchangeable.
I was going to argue a very similar, almost similar to what you just said, Christian, about Newt, in that I think the deaths as a whole in the culture are integral, but specific things didn't necessarily have to, like, could have been omitted in theory.
Absolutely.
But it as a whole, the concept is definitely integral.
And death is just a part of everyday life. You know, it's such a lazy storytelling if you're like, and all the characters are immortal and no one can die. You know, like
well, yeah, but there's a difference between I mean, it's like any book set on Earth probably technically has horses if they've evolved yet, but it doesn't mean that horses are always relevant to your book, if that makes sense. And so I think for this particular story, death is extremely important to the premise of the book, even if all it was backstory. The backstory of those deaths drives the main characters having the reasons to do what they're doing. Yeah. And so I think that this is integral. If you wanted to switch around exactly who died, like, okay, at that point, it's the equivalent of having renamed a character because, like, oh no, a different character we didn't know before starting this book had the backstory that would have been this other character. Like, yeah, technically that's different, but not meaningfully. And so to me, I think this is integral because the only ways you could swap it out would be ways that aren't really changes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, I'm definitely arguing it is integral. I just think it is worth noting that I think part of the hard part is with all three of our topics for this week, we have a cast of people we are talking about. We don't have individuals this time. And so it is a little bit harder to look at it and straight up say, well, this is integral to the plot because, you know, Christian, you're right about like Newt's trauma didn't have to be traumatic. But if you look at our child abuse as a whole, if we took that out of this book, it is not the same book. So it's integral. Death, there are certain deaths that could have been omitted. But if you took out all of the death, this story doesn't even have a premise to start with.
Absolutely.
So it's a weird. This is a weird book. This is a weird episode because we are talking about like I said, like a cast of characters instead of individual people, which we don't normally do.
Yeah,
we've done it before. but it's not our...
Usually for, like, one topic
It was a
time.
very...
Yeah, it's not our modus operandi.
It was a very character-driven book, but there were a lot of characters.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Exactly.
All right. So I think we settled on that was integral. All right. Trauma treated with care. The child abuse, I think... Oh, it was either care or enough care. I'm heading towards care.
Yeah, I think I even want to... I agree, and I think part of the reason I agree as strongly as I do with that statement is actually, Christian, what you had said about wishing that more of the implications were kind of delved into and like fleshed out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Them being omitted takes this down to a level where you could hand this book to a much younger, a much less mature reader, and they would still be fine to read it.
It's definitely meant to
that,
reach
that
a broad
a lot
audience.
of those omissions. Yes, absolutely. And I think it's funny because a lot of times Robin and I read these books and we're like, okay, well, here's our opinion. And then, but with this one, like, you came into this discussion going, man, we didn't really talk about all of the bad things.
Yeah.
And like, it really highlights that. It was funny that you came with that, you know, kind of stated up front, like,
oh, I'm opinionated.
You were already thinking about that. But no, I'm just saying, like, that's a thing that you were already thinking was this book did not delve into these things.
Oh, absolutely.
And we're like, yeah, it didn't for reasons. But you're right that it didn't.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that was the ultimate goal of the author, was to reach the biggest audience possible. You know.
Oh yeah, this is very YA with terrible, awful things happening. But we want 12-year-olds to read this and be okay.
Absolutely.
Like,
right.
Totally.
It's the kind of thing where you could be like, oh, like where you could like think about these a little bit, and there is a lot of like really traumatic stuff that happens in this world, but it wouldn't
leaving a lot of room to build into the world with a bunch of different stories from different perspectives, some darker, some brighter, some
or even just that like a story can be traumatic without being every kind of traumatic, but also without implying that the trauma shown on the page is the only trauma in this world. And I think this had a really good job of balancing that. Okay, so the child abuse, truth, care, memory loss. I'm gonna say enough, but there are the after effects of this, and especially the way it gets wielded against people, has parallels to things like dementia and vegetative states and comas and like all this kind of like real world stuff that people might be dealing with, and it is so close to those that I'm gonna say enough, but please take care of yourselves, because it's a magical analog, but the mapping is really close.
Yeah, if this had showed our memory loss sufferers more on screen in day-to-day lives, this would not have been enough care, I think.
Yeah.
But it doesn't.
Yeah.
But
it also doesn't let you forget that they're affected.
Oh yeah, no, it does not for a minute let you forget that this is a world mechanic.
But it's not like dwelling constantly on it, and I think that balance is
well,
good.
it's almost like a horror element, you know.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I was saying, like fridge horror. So fridge horror is this it's a term for the trope where it's the stuff where when you're consuming the piece of media, you might not necessarily think a ton about it, but when in the middle of the night you go to get a snack from a fridge, you're like, wait a minute.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's so much worse than I thought it was. So this has a lot of that. So like while you're reading the book, it wouldn't necessarily like make you think about it, but later on you're like, oh no, that affected hundreds of people. That's so bad.
Yeah.
that's the fridge horror of it. You're right. Like, it absolutely has, like, this bad stuff that's in there. And then for death, I think either enough or not enough. It's not purely yes or no. I think
it was handled with enough care. It especially towards, the end, it was very beautiful death.
Well, and we got to see characters processing at the end, which
we get
helped.
aftercare.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like the last couple of chapters are aftercare from different characters' perspectives.
Yeah.
Like we get everybody dealing with things afterwards, so that I think definitely is enough care. But this is one of those where there was so much death that if it had straight up been like yes, then that might mean that the topic didn't have enough gravitas in the book.
Yeah, I can see that.
All right. Speaking of points of view, point of view for the child abuse. I think for all three of these, for the most part, so we have like our cast of main characters when the point of view rotates between them. And I think for the most part, we get the point of view of the person in the scene who is most affected pretty uniformly.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, it's very much, this is not a book where you read about someone watching it happen to other people. It's definitely a book where you read about them experiencing it.
And then even with, like, we often, if both of the people involved are one of the points of view characters, we'll often get, we might get one of them while it's happening and then the other one thinking about it later. Like, there's a lot to make it clear that even with the same stuff happening, they didn't all think about it in the same ways. So
lots of points of view.
Yeah. The one that I wish I had gotten that we didn't get that I think would be fascinating would be Vesper's uncle. Because I guess we kind of get the equivalent of that with Casa as someone who, like, I guess actually a Newt too. Like, there's several of them where we end up with you have a memory and then you don't have it anymore, and like the narrative plays with that in really cool ways.
I was gonna say Vesper's uncle, the one scene that I would have loved to see his point of view is when he didn't have his memories.
Yes.
I would have loved I'm not going to say anything else about that.
Right.
But
spoilers.
That would have been the funniest. How would he even be navigating the political decisions he is making?
With just no memory.
But it's not that he has no memory. It's that he has no specific memories.
Yeah.
So he's still functional. He's a fully functional person, and just is. I would have loved to see that scene as just, what is he thinking right now? Like, what is going on? That would have been very good. Yeah. Oh yeah. I will say this, without seeing his part, it's still a very good scene. So, it doesn't cheapen it at all that we get somebody else, but that is the one time where I'm like, man, I would love to know what you're going through right now.
Yeah. All right. For the aspiring writer tip, does anyone have one? I think Christian, you have one.
The flashbacks for me, because, we talked a little bit about this off pod, but, I think we all agreed we really liked the flashbacks. But for me, it just got to where the author felt too reliant on them. And then maybe this is a stretch comparison, but have either of you watched Arrow, the old CW superhero show? So it was told through flashbacks, and so it would be like part of it was present day and then part of it was flashbacks. And then the series got to a point where the flashbacks had caught up to the series. And so then they started to do flashbacks that like didn't really relate to anything. And that was where I felt like the book got to, where you had really good, really productive flashbacks. And then you got to a point where it didn't need flashbacks anymore, but it had already kind of done them. So then you got some unnecessary flashbacks.
See, that was kind of how I felt too. Like in the beginning, maybe for about the first third to a first half, the flashbacks were great and they felt like they were fleshing out what was going on. And then we get to like some of the later ones where it was like, okay, but we've been told already what happened in this scene. And now you're showing it to us. And so it felt like, it felt like I had like this mental image in my head.
I didn't need to be physically told it. I've already figured it like all out throughout.
Beautiful job.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like the author did this beautiful job of having us get it. And then they were like, oh, just for good measure here. And it's like, well, okay.
Yeah.
So even I guess maybe to turn that into a writing tip, in a story with flashbacks, it's really okay to just have some stuff be backstory.
Yeah. You don't have to flesh everything out.
Absolutely.
And something that I had said to you guys when we were setting this up, like, I honestly would have loved to keep all of the flashback scenes, but if those had been like the setup for the rest of the story, like if it was almost like jump cuts as a story beginning almost, that would have felt less like it was interrupting to retell me something, because then it would have just been, I've seen this scene and now they're referring to it and the characters are realizing things about it, instead of it being the characters are realizing things in a way where I piece it together and then I see it later.
Yeah.
But I also realize that that's purely like I'm not sure if that's totally a writing tip, because that's just a thing that my brain would have preferred better.
Maybe. You know, I love the flashbacks. But, you know, I felt like maybe we got to a point.
All right. Favorite non-traumatic thing about the book. Christian, what was yours?
My favorite non-traumatic thing about the book was the blood bonding. I felt, while we did get some exploration into it, I honestly could have had an entire book from the blacksmith's perspective of just all the different people that came in and what they were bonding and why.
Yeah.
That was just such a interesting concept to me.
That was cool. Robin, you want to go next or last?
Last.
Okay. Mine is trauma related, but I think my favorite non-traumatic thing about this book was my favorite not explicitly traumatic thing about this book was that Newt has the same joint issues that I do. And I have literally never seen that in literature until this moment.
Yeah, that would be.
And the author had Newt come up with the same solution that middle school me found worked. So that was cool. Like, yeah, I can verify that is a valid way to handle this, because
I wonder if she... I wonder
that.
if she has any connection to that disability in any way, because, you know, if to know such a little niche solution like that, you would have to be close to that experience.
I mean,
well,
that's also what sensitivity readers are for.
That's true.
So you say, like, hey, plot-wise, I'd like something like this. Is that really a thing? Oh, good, it's really a thing. Let me get somebody who has that thing to make sure that I wrote it correctly.
I mean, and let's be real, it's entirely possible that even if she doesn't herself have anything that would cause this, if you Google EDS, which is not a thing I am diagnosed with, by the way, it just happens to sometimes overlap symptom-wise. and you look at people you can see like who have this problem, the thought of what if you took a bandage and just helped it stay in place, like that's not a wild assumption. Totally.
Right. As
evidenced by 11-year-old me coming up with the same solution with no outside help. Like, you know, that's not a wild thought. But that would actually be interesting to see if the author has any lived experience with this. I don't know. I have no idea. But yeah, that was my favorite thing, was that I have never seen a character in a book with this before. Much less one with a practical real world solution to dealing with it. So,
yep. Trying to think. The problem is, my favorite thing was how it handled and depicted the memory loss, which is a traumatic thing. Trying to think. Okay, no, I know what it is. The depicting teenagers who are still friends after a relationship is over. As of when I originally read this book last year, I hadn't read that before.
It did a good job of it, too. It really did.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And, like, I really, then the romance that happens within the book is handled really well. Like, I really love all of it, because I think especially in a YA novel, there's so much media that's like, the person you date in high school you're gonna be with forever, and then it sets kids up to feel like failures when like that doesn't happen. And so showing something that isn't we're in love forever or I hate them because we broke up, showing that I think is like really, really good. And I loved how it was handled here, because there were reasons that they were friends and then they got together, and it's okay that they're not together anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you are literally just better off as friends.
Yeah.
And also that it doesn't give us a very specific reason for why. Like, I have a theory, but like, it doesn't tell us exactly why. Like, specifically it doesn't, because you don't need the reason why. It's enough that they, as the people in the relationship, decided mutually that they were better off as friends. And I love that whole thing. For the... I guess that's all the things I was going to say.
Yeah, that's everything.
That's everything.
Christian, where can we find you? Where can our audience find you?
You can find me at Lazy Gringo Pod. That's where on Instagram and Twitter. That's where that's the podcast. And then we also have a small clothing line, me and my co-host / business partner, called Lazy Gringo. And yeah, that's the first thing. If you Google Lazy Gringo, we're the first thing that pops up.
Awesome.
Yes, www.lazygringo.store. Yeah, not .com. Okay. The guy who owns .com is
just
a-hole.
Will not sell you the domain name.
Fair enough. Quick question, because this is a clothing business. Are you a brick and mortar only?
We sell online. We do not have a brick and mortar store. We import about 90% of our products from Bolivia. So it's like lounge pants and beanies and sweatshirts and hoodies and anything to be lazy in. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, cool. Absolutely. Please go check us out. I would love to have both of you on the podcast. We typically review like movies or TV shows and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. Awesome. I appreciate it. And again, thank you for getting me to read something. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
And thank you for talking with us about this.
Absolutely.
It's been a lot of fun.
All All music used in this podcast was created by Nicole as Heartbeat Art Co. and is used with permission.
You can follow us on Twitter at Books That Burn, all one word.
You can email us with questions, comments, or book recommendations at booksthatburn@yahoo.com.
Support us on patreon.com/booksthatburn. All patrons get access to our upcoming book list and receive a one-time shout-out.
You can leave us an iTunes review. This helps people to find the show.
And find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks.